in the attitude toward and relationship of Jesus with the avowed enemies of his people, the Samaritans. The gospel indicates that Samaritans were much derided enemies of Jesus' people, the Jews. However, unlike the popular anti-Samaritan sentiments among them, he had with them. Perhaps more shocking to Jesus' audience, both his disciples and his critics, was that he elevated the Samaritan in his parable by contrasting their humaneness to the arrogance and self-adulation of his people. Where large religious traditions were unmoved at the plight of one of their own, according to that Good Samaritan story, one among these despised people graciously rose to the call of service, not minding the risk to his own life. Martin Luther King Jr. called, and then is a conversation with the woman at the well in Sychar. We see that Jesus held the different acts have labeled as their enemies. Of course, we may not romanticize the Samaritans. We know they could be as mean as their Jewish critics. We remember the stories. Despite their cold indifference to him, Jesus modeled for us what somebody called utmost charity. Okay. To understand his motivation and generosity, we may place Jesus' attitude in the context of his Hebraic heritage. The social demand of ancient Hebrew spirituality was justice and fair play. Fulfilling the commandment to love your neighbor. This injunction was founded on the natural anthropology that human beings are self-loving. This self-love is the highest human conception of love. Benchmark the Mosaic law could set for social order in ancient Israel. However, we find in Jesus a higher possibility of incomplete self-giving for the good of others. Jesus was going to demonstrate it shortly when he commanded his disciples to love one another the same way he had loved them, and that is to the end. Okay? The commandment to love, whether in Moses or Jesus, is an oxymoron. For love does not flow from compulsion, yet it was one of the last marching orders Jesus gave his disciples before his crucifixion. He was not demanding that they be emotionally charged towards one another, because emotion is fake or dynamic of imperative love. Rather, he commended love to them as an intentional in the world, rigidly anchored in their loyalty to the one whose kingdom they were in the business of proclaiming. It was to be their unifying factor in their relationships with one another. I begin at home, but it must spill into the nooks and crannies of society. And that is the reason on one of his outings, he spoke to them in public. To you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Do to others as you will have them do to you. So, having preached and exercised this utmost charity and dangerous unselfishness, Jesus commended to his followers in the world of mutual hatred, recriminations, and triumphalism of the power. And he will follow through on it to the end himself. Okay, we can ask ourselves, how does African Christianity weigh on the scale of the Christ paradigm? We'll see that we have not done very well. Okay, I won't have time to look into the details here because time is not on my side. But we'll see that it has been very costly for Africa. So costly that even when we look at of faith that a country which, along with Uganda, was the epicenter of the acclaimed East African evangelical revival of the 1930s, became the nightmare of the continent as Rwandan Christians and non-Christians indulged in orgies of reprisal killings across the country. When we look back at that, we see that that is a blemish on our testimony as African Christians. Okay, as if the reversal of the fortunes of this African revival in the genocide is not a cause for introspection. Take South Sudan and its Christian populations are locked up. They never had a breathing space for reconstruction after independence from their repressive brothers and sisters in the north. And of course, like South Sudan, Nigeria does not give much to cheer about. Its indulgent Southern Christianity, which is popular in sub-Saharan Africa, valorizes material success and social influence. For decades, and indifferent to the plight of his brothers and sisters in the Middle Belt and the Far North, who have for decades been under psychological repression of their Muslim rulers. The ante was raised after the 2015 election, which ushered in the government of Muhammadu Buhari, who proclaimed to his West African free elite they have, including Southern Nigerian Christians, pretends to not know what is going on in that part of the country. Of course, again, the aftermath of the 2023 elections is also brewing its hatred. Go and ask our Igbo brothers in Southwest and how much they have suffered after that election. Their houses have been demolished, their business have been destroyed, and they have suffered a lot. Ongoing, verbal demonization of these people. One thing, as far as that election, in fact, they have lost a lot since after the Civil War. Where is that Christ paradigm in African Christianity? That is the question we need to ask ourselves. The second point is spiritual vitality. Bediako submitted that Africa's most important resource for its needed transformation may well reside in its current Christian spiritual vitality. By implication, he recognizes Africa's need for transformation, although he did not state specifically in which direction. But the context of his argument may hold the key. As he said, it is possible to trace the traditional religious roots of some of the problems of post-independent political authoritarianism in Africa, and that Bediako sees the domain of governance in Africa as in need of transformation. It is interesting, although not surprising, that the African cultural enthusiast named contemporary African governance as a domain in need of transformation because of the problem of the African traditional culture of governance. His words, in many countries of Africa, traditional problematic to see the potential resolution of this hearted challenge of governance in current African Christian spiritual vitality. Perhaps the place to begin is to unravel the popular qualification of Africa's Christian spiritual vitality. That much of it is linked to the worldview and culture of the people in their prayerful wrestling against pervasive evil in the African environment, whether it is bodily sickness, endemic life failures, or the consequence of misgovernance. Okay. Another writer stuff where what was embodied because of and migration, noted that joyful resilience in the face of adversity of African Christian vitality, a traditional religious cultural formation. Perhaps to this, we may add the motivational messages to not accept their fate as inextricably bound to the pervasive economic hopelessness around them, but to rise above its tide and make something of their lives. Despite their value for the well-being of the people, it is that that will make the people and their continent thrive indeed. Okay, and the reason is not far to seek. If we look at it, the root of that vitality, as I said, is innate African religious sensibilities. Okay, which are still in environment. Is responsible for vitality, and it is also responsible for patriarchal tendencies of leadership, which has been important to governance in Africa. It becomes problematic how that vitality will come out of this sacralization of by politicians, because the patriarchs of the Christian communities have done that. If you say something negative about okay, and so, but however we look at it, there's no doubt that Africans, and Kwame Bidiako mentioned this, the churches have written politicians about their role in governance. A new religious achievement was linked with the mind of the people will refer to, UP Scarf's, work on the way rejoicing. Is it forward or the closing remark in that book? I would think that the role of African churchmen in the attainment of independence was much more significant. Of course, he mentioned, the case of Ghana, which we can term its governance. We can refer to the Aboriginal rights movements, among the Fanti churchmen, and how they stopped the British people from, taking over lands of the people and the rest of it. Okay. Let me conclude this section by saying that his perspective on current African Christian spiritual vitality as a tool for remediating governance in Africa may be problematic, and his submission on the contribution of African Christians to the democratization of governance in the 1980s and 1990s may be contestable. Yet, is the mind of Christ in the context of the exercise of power, not only in political governance, but also in Christian leadership, may in the long run hold the secret to the healing of misgovernance in Africa. I leave that there. And let me quickly come to conscientizing Christian communities. Now, one of the clear manifestation of dissonance between accession to Christianity and social change came to the fore in Abeokuta in 1857. That year, Bishop Weeks came from Sierra Leone and visited Abeokuta, and he was shocked to find among Yoruba mission agents persons who are holding their compatriots as domestic slaves. And you wonder, how could persons who themselves have been liberated from slavery and rehabilitated at no cost to themselves hold others in slavery? Okay, that observation slavery, which held in 1880, I shared this at the conference we had at Akrofi in, I think 2000. I can't remember now whether it's around 2006 when we had this conference on slavery and slave trade to mark the, I think, 200th anniversary of the prohibition of slavery. It's in one of the, my submission in this on this matter is in JACT. You can see it there. Now, when you look at the entry of Christianity to African society, when we look at the achievement of missions, especially the emergence of new elites, the way they got involved, with the problems of slavery, slave trade, to kill it at its root, to help Africans, to be quote unquote enlightened, and to uplift, the quality of life of Africans. We have inherited all that, and we have acknowledged, the faith in words, okay, especially as it has been translated into African languages. But when it comes to appropriating the word indeed, using, letting the liberation or the setting free or transformation the word has brought to Africa, we are not allowing it to filter down to our people. We who have become the beneficiaries of that of missionary message, who have reaped benefits of their generosity, we have not shared that generosity with our brothers and sisters. Okay, we've seen, poverty, material indigence, in the lives of our people, and in a way that scandalizes our message. Kwame Bediako talks about calling out our resources, and he talks about the religious ones. And I think that our history, our experiences, the values in our traditional environment, in our traditional cultures, they are among these resources. We have used them in a way to domesticate the faith, but we still need to go further to use it to empower that. My reading response concurs with Bediako's submission that African Christianity has the religious resources to mediate healing to the continent, to sustain hope, and place the continent in a position where its people can contribute significantly to the emerging global order. However, the current state and priorities of the churches do not show that the leadership of African Christian communities is envisioning and pursuing goals that will lead in that direction. The vitality of faith is yet to be given consistent, meaningful, and redemptive application that could reset the social ethical woes assailing our people. Rather, responses to them have been sporadic and reactionary, instead of being consistent and strategic. Current African Christianity has not only historical antecedents to draw from, but there are contemporary models of engaging ministries worldwide from which church leaders can learn in their ecumenical interactions and international alliances. Many of the mission churches, they still belong to their global alliances. When we go to these conferences, do we learn, do we see models that we can domesticate at home and make a difference in the lives of our people? Perhaps most urgent in this vein is the need to develop the capacity for the theological formation of African lay Christians. Their faith vitality needs to be creatively harnessed for their salvation and the redemption of their future. But that faith must find incarnation in personal lives, as Bediako unambiguously stated. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Kehinde. We really appreciate what you shared with us, and particularly as you mentioned at the beginning that 25 years was not too early to reflect on Kwame Bediako's article, and we're very grateful that you did that this year and that you were able to share that with us. It was actually very relevant to the topic, the theme of the whole conference. And in fact, it wasn't just informative, it was giving us the challenges for the African dimension of world Christianity. And I picked up some very key challenges there. I'm trusting that it was as clear for those in the room as it was for those of us that were meeting online. And trust that if anyone did join midway or didn't hear clearly, that you'll be able to listen to the recording, because it was very worthwhile time that we spent. So thank you very much. I believe we may have just 5 minutes for questions. Perhaps if we could take one question online and then one in the room, and then see if we have some time at the end. I've seen online a hand raised by Samuel Ofori. Please, if you would give us your contribution or question, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, Samuel Ofori, can you hear? Perhaps you can unmute and give us your contribution. Okay, the hand is raised, but we're not getting anything. Is there anyone else online who would like to ask a question or comment at all? Okay, I've seen Maureen. Perhaps you could come in at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abinto Kehinde. It's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for all the things you shared. I think today my heart is just on the distance between the Christian we have, reading scripture, going to church, the character formation. You talk about providing that theological formation for lay people. You find that so much praying, so much quoting of the scriptures, so much of all that Christianity quotes is from get of the enemy next door. These people, they chase you all over the world. You can't get away from them. Say, think is the help connection between the scriptures we read, the worship songs, the praise songs, the prayer. And who
appreciate how we share a common destiny within the matrix in which we are all functioning. That's why the words of Jesus was important to his disciple. Love one another. Important to his disciple. Love one another. Okay, we don't proclaim that love one another. It is love yourself. Love. First of all, I've seen this funny way of people interpreting the question, the saying.